Perseus had killed Medusa. The Gorgon was dead. Her head had been severed from her body, and the hero had carried it away as proof of his impossible victory. But Medusa's story did not end there. In fact, something extraordinary happened after her death. The monster became more powerful as a symbol than she had ever been in life. Her head still possessed the terrible power of her gaze. Anyone who looked directly at it could still be turned to stone. Perseus used that power against his enemies, and eventually he gave Medusa's head to Athena, the goddess who, in the later tradition, had transformed Medusa, now carried the image of the Gorgon herself. Athena placed Medusa's terrifying face upon her shield or breastplate, and from that moment, Medusa's face became something much larger than the monster Perseus had killed. It became a symbol, a warning, and most importantly, a form of protection. The image became known as the Gorgonian, and it began appearing throughout the ancient Greek world, on shields, on armor, on temples, on pottery, on coins, and on objects that were meant to protect the people who carried or displayed them. But why would the Greeks use the face of a monster as a protective symbol? Because the idea was almost paradoxical. To frighten away evil, you used an image terrifying enough to frighten evil itself. Medusa's face became a threat directed at other threats. Her gaze had once been something people feared. Now, her image was being used to make others afraid. The monster had become a guardian, and that transformation is one of the most fascinating parts of Medusa's mythology. Because Medusa herself was not the only thing that changed. Her appearance changed too. And if we want to understand how, we have to go back to the ancient writers. One of the earliest surviving literary accounts of Medusa comes from the Greek poet Hesiod. In his Theogony, Hesiod tells us that Phorcys and Ceto had 3 Gorgon daughters. Their names were Steno, Euryale, and Medusa, but there was one crucial difference. Medusa was mortal. Her sisters were immortal. Hesiod does not give us the detailed monster description that many modern people associate with Medusa. He does not tell us that she was once a beautiful priestess. He does not tell us that Athena transformed her. And he does not give us the elaborate story of punishment that many people know today. Instead, he gives us something much older. Medusa is simply one of the Gorgons, and she has a tragic fate. Hesiod also tells us that Poseidon lay with Medusa, and that when Perseus later killed her, Pegasus and Chrysaor emerged from her body. So the earliest surviving literary tradition already gives us the essential structure. 3 Gorgons, 1 mortal, 2 immortal, Poseidon, Perseus, and Medusa's death. But the monster herself is still surrounded by mystery. And then, another Greek poet gives us a different glimpse. Centuries later, the poet Pindar wrote about Medusa and her sisters in his 12th Pythian ode. And here, the picture becomes more frightening. Pindar refers to the Gorgons' terrifying cries and describes their serpent-covered heads. The Gorgons are no longer simply mysterious supernatural sisters. They are terrifying beings, creatures whose appearance and voices inspire horror. But then Pindar gives us something unexpected. He refers to Medusa as beautiful-cheeked. Think about that for a moment. The same mythic figure can be described as terrifying, and yet beautiful. That matters, because it tells us something important about Medusa. The idea of Medusa as a beautiful woman did not suddenly appear for the first time with Ovid. There are earlier Greek traditions that connect her with beauty, but they do not yet give us the exact story most people know today. There is no simple, beautiful woman becomes monster narrative here. Instead, beauty and horror exist side by side, and that contradiction would become central to Medusa's image. Then we come to another important source, the work known as the Library, traditionally attributed to Apollodorus. This account gives us a much more detailed physical description. The Gorgons are described with heads surrounded by dragon-like scales, great tusks like those of boars, brazen hands, and golden wings, and their gaze could turn those who saw them into stone. This is much closer to the monstrous Medusa that dominates popular imagination today. But there is another detail that matters enormously. Apollodorus again makes the distinction between the sisters clear. There were 3 Gorgons, but Medusa alone was mortal. That was why Perseus was sent to bring back her head. Her sisters could not simply be killed. Medusa could, and that single difference was the weakness Perseus needed. So by this point in the tradition, we have a terrifying Gorgon. Serpents, tusks, wings, bronze hands, a deadly gaze, and yet the ancient sources still haven't settled on one single appearance. Because mythology was never one perfectly fixed story. Different poets, different generations, and different artists could tell the story differently. And then, many centuries later, a Roman poet would completely change how the world imagined Medusa. His name was Ovid, a Roman poet who lived during the time of Augustus, and his Metamorphoses would become one of the most influential retellings of Greek mythology ever written. Ovid gives us a Medusa who is very different. According to his version, Medusa was once extraordinarily beautiful. Her hair was especially admired. Suitors came because of her beauty. She was not introduced simply as a monster born into a family of monsters. She was presented as a beautiful mortal woman. Then, her life changed forever. Ovid tells of an encounter between Medusa and Neptune, the Roman name for Poseidon, inside the temple of Minerva, the Roman Athena, and Minerva responds by transforming Medusa's beautiful hair into snakes. Now, this is the version that became enormously influential. The beautiful woman, the violation, the angry goddess, the snakes, the transformation, and the monster. But here's something important. Ovid's version came centuries after Hesiod. It should not be presented as though it were the original Greek account. It is a later Roman retelling, and that distinction matters, because when people say, the real story of Medusa, there isn't always one simple answer. There are different traditions, different authors, different centuries, and different Medusas, and the transformation wasn't happening only in literature. It was happening in art. Early Greek artists often portrayed the Gorgon as deliberately terrifying. Her face could be exaggerated. Her eyes were enormous. Her mouth was wide. Her teeth were exposed. Her tongue could hang from her mouth. She could have tusks, wings, serpents, and sometimes even a beard. The point wasn't to make her beautiful. The point was to make you afraid. The Gorgon's face was meant to confront the viewer. You weren't supposed to admire it. You were supposed to feel threatened by it. And that makes sense, because the Gorgon was an image of danger. Her gaze killed, her face terrified. Her very appearance was part of her supernatural power. But then, something began to change. Beginning around the 5th century BCE, Greek representations of Medusa increasingly became more human and feminine. The monstrous features began to soften. The exaggerated face became more controlled. The grotesque appearance gradually moved toward something more beautiful, more recognizable, more human. The Metropolitan Museum of Art describes this broader artistic transformation as a movement from the grotesque toward the beautiful and feminine during the classical period. And suddenly, Medusa could look less like a creature and more like a woman. But the snakes remained. That was important, because the artist could make her beautiful, without allowing us to forget what she was. A beautiful face, surrounded by danger. A woman's face, carrying the power of death. Beauty and horror in the same image. And this may explain why Medusa remained so fascinating. She was no longer simply frightening. She was contradictory. You could look at her and see beauty, then notice the snakes, and remember the monster. And the more human her face became, the more psychologically complicated she became. She wasn't just something to fear. She became something to contemplate. And now we return to the strangest part. The Greeks were placing Medusa's face on shields, armor, buildings, coins, and sacred objects. Why? Because the Gorgonian was widely understood as an apotropaic image, a symbol intended to ward off evil or danger. In simple terms, you used something frightening to frighten away something else. Medusa's face became a weapon without Medusa being alive. Imagine walking toward an enemy and seeing the face of the Gorgon staring back from a shield. The message was clear. Come closer, if you dare. The terrifying face that once represented death now represented protection. Her power had been turned outward, and Athena's use of the image made that transformation even more powerful. Athena, the goddess associated with wisdom and warfare, carried the face of the creature who had been killed by Perseus. The monster was now part of the goddess's armor. Medusa had lost her life, but somehow her image had gained a new one. And this is perhaps the strangest thing about Medusa. Perseus killed her, but he could not make her disappear. Her head survived, her image survived, her story survived, and her face continued appearing in art, long after the people who first told her story were gone. The face changed, the meaning changed, the artists changed, the writers changed, but Medusa remained, sometimes terrifying, sometimes beautiful, sometimes both. And that tells us something about mythology. Myths don't always stay still. They evolve with the people telling them. One generation sees a monster, another sees a warning, another sees a symbol of protection, another sees a beautiful woman trapped inside a terrifying story. And thousands of years later, we are still arguing about which version tells us who Medusa really was. But there is one detail that makes her story even more fascinating. The change from monster to beautiful woman didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, and different artists imagined her differently. Some kept the monstrous face. Others made her almost completely human. Some showed a beautiful woman with snakes. Others emphasized the horror. And eventually, Medusa became one of the most recognizable female faces in classical mythology. Not because she was the only monster, but because she became the perfect contradiction. Beautiful, but deadly. Human, but monstrous. Dead, but still powerful. Today, when most people hear the name Medusa, they immediately picture snakes. But the image in our minds is actually the result of centuries of storytelling and artistic transformation. The Medusa of Hesiod is not exactly the Medusa of Pindar. Pindar's Medusa is not exactly the Medusa of Apollodorus, and neither is exactly the Medusa of Ovid. And the Medusa of Ovid is not exactly the Medusa created by later Greek and Roman artists. Each generation left something behind, a different face, a different meaning, a different interpretation. And perhaps that's why Medusa never disappeared, because she was never only one thing. She could be the monster, the victim, the weapon, the warning, the guardian, the beautiful woman, the terrifying Gorgon, or all of them at once. And perhaps the greatest irony is this. Perseus thought he was carrying home the head of a monster, but what he actually carried into history was one of the most powerful symbols the ancient world ever created. A face that could terrify, a face that could protect, a face that could represent death and still somehow survive it. Medusa died thousands of years ago, but her face is still looking back at us. And perhaps that's the real reason the story never ends, because every generation looks at Medusa and sees something different. But there is one final question we haven't answered. If the Greeks could transform Medusa from a terrifying monster into a beautiful and powerful figure, what did Medusa's face eventually come to mean? And how did that ancient Gorgon become the symbol we still recognize today? That is where Medusa's story takes its next turn.